Montana Territory, 1878. The harsh winter winds howled through the pines surrounding Copper Creek, a settlement carved from wilderness by those brave or foolish enough to test their mettle against nature's cruelty. Among them was Bonnie James, 22 years old with honey blonde hair that cascaded past her shoulders when not pinned beneath her practical bonnet. Her father's passing had left her the sole proprietor of the modest clinic that served the scattered ranches and homesteads within a day's ride. Another blizzard coming, she murmured to herself, tightening the blue woolen shawl around her shoulders as she stared out the frosted window. She knew too well what such storms brought: frostbite, broken limbs, and sometimes men more dead than alive. Frontier medicine was a lonely profession, especially for a woman who'd learned her skills at her father's side rather than in some Eastern school. Bonnie believed the frontier was no place for tenderness. Out here, attachments were dangerous. They made you vulnerable in a land that punished weakness. Her father's death 2 winters prior had only reinforced this conviction. She'd built walls around her heart as solid as the log cabin that housed her clinic, focusing instead on surviving and serving the community that depended on her healing hands. What she wanted was simple: to maintain her independence and continue her father's legacy. What she never acknowledged, even to herself, was the emptiness that settled in her chest on nights when the wind's moaning was her only companion. That evening, as darkness fell early and the first snowflakes began their silent descent, the pounding at her door came like thunder. "Miss James. Please, Miss James." A frantic voice carried through the wooden planks. She unbolted the door to find Thomas Wilson, a rancher from the North Valley, supporting a half-conscious man whose blood left a crimson trail in the freshly fallen snow. Ambushed 5 miles east, Thomas panted, struggling under the weight. Found him crawling toward the trail. "Been shot twice." Bonnie's practiced eyes assessed the situation instantly. "Bring him in. Table's ready." They maneuvered the wounded stranger onto her examination table. He was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair and a face that might have been handsome beneath the dirt, blood, and 3-day stubble. His clothes marked him as a cowboy. Good boots, practical riding clothes. Nothing fancy except the silver concho on his belt. "Who is he?" she asked, cutting away his blood-soaked shirt. "Name's Adam Oakley, according to papers in his saddlebag. Works for the Rockingham outfit north of here. Was carrying their payroll when bushwhacked." As Thomas left to spread word about the attack, Bonnie set to work. The first bullet had pierced his left shoulder, thankfully missing anything vital. The second was lodged in his side, dangerously close to his liver. For hours, she worked methodically, extracting the bullet, cleaning the wounds, stitching torn flesh. The stranger drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally moaning or muttering incoherent fragments about catching them and duty. "Your only duty now is to heal," she whispered, though she doubted he heard. By dawn, his fever raged. For 3 days, Bonnie barely slept, continuously bathing his brow with cool water, changing bandages, and forcing broth between his cracked lips. On the 4th morning, his eyes, a startling blue she hadn't noticed before, finally opened with clarity. "Am I dead?" he rasped, staring at her as sunlight filtered through the window, creating a halo around her blonde hair. "Not for lack of trying," Bonnie replied, maintaining professional distance despite the strange flutter in her chest when their eyes met. "The money," he started, attempting to rise. She pressed him gently back. "Sheriff recovered it from your horse. The men who shot you escaped, but at least they didn't get what they were after." Relief washed over his features, followed quickly by pain. "Thank you for saving my life, Miss James." "Bonnie James. Adam Oakley." He extended his good hand weakly. When she took it, something passed between them, a current she hadn't felt before and immediately distrusted. Over the following weeks, Adam's body slowly mended under Bonnie's care. February turned to March, and as winter's grip loosened on the Montana highlands, she discovered layers to the wounded cowboy that challenged her preconceptions. Unlike many men who viewed her medical knowledge with suspicion, Adam showed genuine respect for her skills. He asked thoughtful questions about her treatments, listened intently to her explanations, and never once suggested a woman shouldn't be doing such work. During long evenings while snowdrifts slowly receded outside, he shared stories of his 5 years working cattle drives from Texas to Montana. Born in Pennsylvania, he'd headed west after the war, seeking something he couldn't quite name. My pa was a doctor, he confessed one night as she changed his bandages. Wanted me to follow in his footsteps, but I couldn't stomach being trapped indoors. Needed sky above me. And now? She asked, noticing how the lamplight softened his features. Now I'm thinking there might be value in walls and a roof, he said with a smile that reached his eyes. Against her better judgment, Bonnie found herself sharing pieces of her own story. Her mother's death in childbirth, her father teaching her medicine from age 10, the townspeople's initial reluctance to accept a female healer. Frontier folk can be stubborn about change, Adam observed. Says the man who rode 1,000 miles rather than stay put, she retorted, surprising herself with the teasing tone. His laughter, warm and genuine, seemed to fill empty corners of the cabin she hadn't realized were vacant. By early April, Adam was strong enough to move about without assistance. He insisted on helping with chores, chopping wood, repairing loose boards on the porch, even assisting when patients came for treatment. You're not obligated to work for your care, Bonnie told him one afternoon as they organized her medicinal herbs. I pay my debts, he replied simply. Besides, idle hands make for a restless mind. What remained unspoken was how naturally they'd fallen into a rhythm together, how the clinic felt less like a place of duty and more like a home with his presence. The inevitable moment came on a clear April morning when Adam announced, "Foreman from Rockingham brought my wages yesterday. I can head back to the ranch now." Bonnie felt her carefully constructed walls trembling. Your wounds have healed well. There's no medical reason for you to stay longer. His blue eyes held hers for a moment too long. Bonnie, The door burst open as Mrs. Peterson arrived with her son, who'd managed to break his arm falling from a hay loft. The moment shattered, and by evening, Adam had packed his few belongings. I can never repay what you've done, he said, standing awkwardly by the door, hat in hand. It's my calling, she answered, voice steady despite the unexpected ache in her chest. Safe travels, Mr. Oakley. He nodded once, placed his hat on his head, and walked out the door. Bonnie watched from the window as he mounted the horse the ranch had sent for him, turned once to look back at the clinic, then rode away. She told herself the hollow feeling would pass. After all, patients came and went. This one was no different. Summer arrived with its brief, glorious warmth. Bonnie continued her work, traveling to distant homesteads when patients couldn't come to her, delivering babies, setting bones, treating fevers. If she occasionally caught herself looking down the trail when riders approached, hoping for a familiar silhouette, she never admitted it to herself. In late August, news spread of a confrontation between the Rockingham Hands and the gang that had attacked Adam months before. The outlaws had been captured after a shootout near the Wyoming border. According to reports, Adam Oakley had been instrumental in tracking them down, having recognized one of the men's distinctive saddle during the original ambush. Your cowboy's quite the hero, remarked Sarah Miller as Bonnie wrapped her sprained wrist. They say he insisted on being part of the posse despite the foreman wanting him to stay with the herd. He's not my cowboy, Bonnie corrected, ignoring the warmth that crept up her neck. He was simply a patient. Sarah's knowing smile suggested she believed otherwise. September brought an unexpected letter delivered by a passing cattle buyer. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the paper creased from travel. Miss James, you may be surprised to receive this correspondence. I've started this letter a dozen times since leaving your care, each attempt more awkward than the last. Plain speaking is best on the frontier, so here it is. The men who ambushed me have been brought to justice. With that chapter closed, I find myself at a crossroads. The Rockingham has offered me a promotion to foreman of their northern pastures, a position that would provide stability few cowboys ever achieve. Yet I find myself reluctant to accept without first addressing what I left unfinished in Copper Creek. During those weeks of healing, I discovered something more valuable than the payroll I was protecting. I found a woman of extraordinary courage, intelligence, and compassion. I understand if this letter finds you unmoved or promised to another. But if there's any possibility you might welcome my return, even just to continue our conversations by your hearth, I would ride through another blizzard for the chance. With respect and admiration. Adam Oakley. Bonnie read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling slightly. She locked it in her father's old desk drawer, telling herself she needed time to consider a response. Days passed, then weeks, as she drafted replies in her mind but committed none to paper. October painted the mountains with golden aspens and crimson maples. Bonnie found herself distracted, making small errors in her normally precise work. The letter haunted her thoughts, not because of what it said, but because of how it made her feel: hopeful, frightened, alive. On the first truly cold day of autumn, as she returned from treating a miner's injured leg, Bonnie spotted smoke rising from her cabin's chimney. Alarm shot through her. She'd left no fire burning. Approaching cautiously, she heard the rhythmic sound of chopping wood. Rounding the corner, she stopped short at the sight of Adam Oakley stacking split logs beside her porch. He looked up, axe paused mid-swing, and their eyes met across the yard. He'd filled out since his recovery, his frame solid with the muscle of hard work. The uncertainty in his expression mirrored her own tumultuous feelings. "You didn't write back," he said simply, lowering the axe. "I didn't know what to say," she admitted. "I figured as much." He set the axe against the chopping block and wiped his hands on his trousers. "So I decided to come hear the answer in person, whatever it might be." "That was presumptuous of you." A small smile touched his lips. "Presumptuous would be filling your woodpile without asking. I'm just being prepared for our conversation. Montana nights get cold." Despite herself, Bonnie felt her resolve weakening. "And if the conversation is brief, then I'll have done one last service for the woman who saved my life." His tone was light, but his eyes held a seriousness that made her breath catch. They talked into the night. The fire Adam had built casting warm light throughout the cabin. He told her of his promotion, the small house that came with it just 15 miles north of Copper Creek. He spoke of plans for breeding quality horses alongside his ranch duties. "It's not a fortune," he said, "but it's a future with promise." "Why come back here first?" she asked, the question that had lingered since seeing him in her yard. "You could have accepted and settled in directly." Adam leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because every time I imagined that future, you were in it. Working beside you these past months, seeing your dedication to healing others despite the hardships, it changed something in me. I used to think a man needed nothing but open country and work that mattered. Now I know there's more." His honesty stripped away her practiced defenses. "The frontier isn't kind to attachments, Adam. People leave, they die. My father taught me medicine, but his death taught me that loving someone means eventually losing them." "That's true anywhere," he replied gently. "Back east, out west, loving means risking loss. The question is whether what comes between is worth it." Before she could respond, pounding at the door interrupted them. The Johnsons' youngest had taken a turn with fever, and they needed her immediately. "Go," Adam said as she gathered her medical bag. "I'll wait." She returned near dawn to find him asleep in the chair, his face peaceful in repose. Something shifted in her heart at the sight. This man who understood her calling, who waited without complaint, who saw her work as valuable rather than an obstacle. As if sensing her presence, he stirred. "Everything all right?" he asked, voice husky with sleep. "The crisis has passed," she said, removing her cloak. "The fever broke." He nodded, watching her with a tenderness that made her usual self-sufficiency feel suddenly insufficient. "I've been thinking about your letter," she said, taking the chair opposite him. "About what you left unfinished here." And his question hung in the air between them. "I've spent years believing that independence was the only safe path on the frontier, that needing no one meant never being abandoned." She met his gaze directly. "But these past months without you have been emptier than I expected." Hope kindled in his eyes. "Bonnie, I'm not finished," she interrupted, needing to complete her thought. "I can't abandon my practice. These people need me." "I would never ask that of you," he said firmly. "Your healing is part of who you are, part of why He stopped, swallowed. "Part of why I care for you." The words that had seemed so difficult to form in her letters now came naturally. "Then perhaps we could find a way forward that honors both our callings." Their courtship unfolded through the winter months, proper, respectful, but underscored by a deepening connection that neither had expected to find on the frontier. Adam split his time between ranch duties and helping Bonnie, expanding her clinic to accommodate more patients and improving the buggy she used for house calls. In February, exactly 1 year after he'd been carried bleeding into her life, A blizzard struck that made the previous year's storm seem gentle by comparison. Bonnie worried when Adam, who had ridden out to check fence lines, didn't return by nightfall. As the hours passed and the storm intensified, her mind conjured terrible scenarios. Adam lying injured in a snowdrift, slowly freezing as she had once feared her father had. By midnight, her rational medical training warred with rising panic. Just as she was preparing to go searching herself, a desperate, foolish plan, the door burst open. Adam staggered in, half frozen but alive, having abandoned his horse at a sheltered outcropping when the animal could go no further. I promised myself, if I survived, I'd stop wasting time. He managed through chattering teeth as she stripped his frozen clothes and wrapped him in blankets before the fire. Wasting time on what? She asked, rubbing circulation back into his blue-tinged hands. Once warmth had returned enough for coherent speech, Adam reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, crudely carved but lovingly polished. Made this myself, he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. Been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. Then I thought I might die out there without ever asking. His eyes, serious and tender, met hers. Bonnie James, will you marry me? Be my partner in all things, as I'll be yours. The walls she'd built around her heart didn't so much crumble as simply cease to exist. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes. Their wedding in April drew people from 3 counties, ranchers, miners, homesteaders, and cowboys who had benefited from Bonnie's healing touch over the years. The small church in Copper Creek overflowed with well-wishers as they spoke their vows, promising to face frontier challenges together rather than alone. Adam had surprised her by purchasing land adjacent to her clinic, where he'd already begun building an addition that would serve both as their home and an expanded medical facility. I spoke with the Rocking M. He explained when she questioned how he could manage both ranching and helping her. They've agreed to let me oversee the horse breeding program from here. I'll still ride out when needed, but this will be my primary work. By summer's end, their expanded clinic had become the pride of the county, with a proper surgery, recovery rooms, and even a small garden where Bonnie grew medicinal herbs. Adam's horses grazed in nearby pastures, already developing a reputation for quality and intelligence. One evening as they sat on their new porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Adam took her hand. Do you remember telling me the frontier isn't kind to attachments? He asked. Bonnie nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. I've been thinking about that, he continued. Maybe the harshness is precisely why attachments matter more out here. In civilization, people can exist in isolation despite being surrounded by others. But here we need each other to survive, she finished for him. More than survive, he corrected gently. To live fully. As autumn approached again, Bonnie confirmed what she had suspected for weeks. Their family would grow by spring. When she shared the news, Adam lifted her in a careful embrace, his joy radiating like a physical force. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Bonnie reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. I was so certain independence was the only safe path, she murmured. That needing no one meant never losing anyone. Adam's hand found hers beneath the quilt. And now I know that some risks are worth taking. She placed their joined hands over her still flat stomach. That building something together is braver than standing alone. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through pine boughs, no longer a lonely sound but the backdrop to a life richer than she had ever dared imagine. The frontier remained harsh and unforgiving, but they would face it as they had faced everything since a wounded cowboy had been carried through her door, together, stronger for having found each other in a land where nothing, especially love, came easy.